Oh, do you want me to do this introduction?
Sure.
Okay. Now I just have to probably get it lower here for myself, which means, what does that mean?
No, I don't know if I had it at the right.
That's this one?
Here. Here it is.
Okay. Because I'm so short. Okay, let me see if I can focus it. Wait. Oh, I see, that's this one.
Should I tighten it here?
A little lower still. Let's see. No, higher.
Higher.
Okay.
Sorry.
Okay. Thanks for your patience.
Here. Use this thing. Now,
No, that might be good.
just there?
Yeah.
Okay.
That's good, I think. That's good. Okay. So, we're still, let me put the tape in. Let's just make sure we have everything.
But this does the sound as well.
This will take the sound from this microphone.
Uh-huh.
So, it's,
yes.
you know, we don't have to think of too much. In fact,
Yes.
maybe give me the headset.
Now, what about her glasses? Is that going to be a problem?
It's a bit glare, but she wears
Glare
glasses.
because of the... Okay.
But what can you do with her glasses?
Yeah. Okay.
They'll criticize it after.
Oh, the headset.
Headset. Yeah, sorry. I'm like without language at this point. Okay. Headset. I think
So
we're
you're
set.
going to ask me questions? Or?
She'll ask you a bit of questions at any time. It's your interview. It's more your story, what you'd like to tell people. She might, go back and ask something that maybe stuck out in her mind.
Yes.
If there's something you don't want to talk about, stop us.
Okay.
It's all up to
because
you.
you'll cut it, you'll audit it.
No, not really. They
No.
stay as they are pretty much, at
They
least at this
do.
point. At one point.
Yeah.
It's really your story. It's just that we have these questions that have been developed over
Yeah.
doing these
Yeah.
interviews, and also just so that we remember to ask pertinent
The
questions.
necessary,
But
yes.
there may be things that I forget to ask you that are not on here that you
Yeah.
want to express.
Yes,
So,
right.
one thing I'm
Let
going
me
to
I don't hear too well, so I may
Okay,
have to...
so we'll have to talk louder.
Yes.
I'll have to
Okay.
talk about it.
I'm
Let me grab my water.
Oh, do you have water too?
Yeah. I think, is this my water or yours?
That's yours.
Okay.
It's full, it's yours.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so where are we now? Okay, all right. We're here the second day for the Kinder Transport reunion in London, England. It's June 16th, 1999. And today we're here with...
Ruth Biswas,
And you're from?
Berlin,
Mm-hmm. And could you just spell your last name for us?
Biswas.
Okay, thank you.
I was born Ruth Israel.
Mm-hmm.
You were born Ruth Israel, and where and when were you born?
I was born in 1926, so I was 7, I think, when the Nazis came.
What were your parents' names, Ruth?
My father's name was Georg Israel, and my mother's name Erna. Now, my mother was not Jewish, but she left the church and, I think she more or less felt herself as a Jew, although we were an assimilated family from my parents' generation anyway, and not in any way religious.
And where were your parents born?
In Berlin.
They were both born in Berlin.
Yes.
And how long had your family lived there? How many generations?
Well, my paternal grandfather came to Berlin as a young man from the countryside north of Berlin, from Mecklenburg. And my mother's parents, her mother came from Thorn on the Polish border, and her father came from Hanover.
And what did your parents do for a living?
My father was a lawyer, and a lawyer then, but he was deposed of his job as soon as the Nazis came. So the coming of the Nazis hit us straight away.
How many siblings did you have?
I'm the middle one. I had an elder brother and a younger sister.
And did they live with you? Did anyone else live with you?
They lived with me, and our maternal grandmother came to live with us when we were quite small, because my grandfather had died. My brother unfortunately didn't survive the war. He was called into forced labor and died in a camp called Großbeeren, just outside Berlin. My sister survived all the bombing and everything, and then immediately after the war was evacuated through some Jewish organization to be out of the city in this terrible time when there was no food or anything. Unfortunately, she caught scarlet fever and died after the war was over, which was a real family tragedy.
What were their names, your brother and sister and your maternal grandmother?
My maternal grandmother.
Was the one who lived with you?
Oh, yes.
Yes.
Her name was Schäfer, Johanna Schäfer, and she was a wonderfully kind, very simple, straightforward woman. My brother was called Georg, after my father and grandfather, and my sister Esther, because she was born at Purim.
And your brother Georg, who was named after your father and grandfather, is this your maternal grandfather or
paternal?
Paternal.
So it's George first, second, third, and
your
our
paternal?
first son is also called George.
And your paternal grandmother's name? I'm sorry.
Oh yes, my grandmother's name was Ida Meyer, maiden name.
Okay. Tell a little bit about your family. Was it a close family?
Oh
How
yes.
were your relatives?
Well, my father was not a very sociable man, really. He didn't like going out, so ours was not a, maybe when I was very small, but then as the Nazis came and tensions, worries came up, we rather kept very much to ourselves, really.
Okay, and also, what about the religious situation in your family? Were you very religious?
No, not at all. I wish there had been a little bit more of it, really. My father just was not religious, so he didn't pass any Jewish tradition on to us, but he was very firmly Jewish in a sort of origin intellectual way.
And did you celebrate holidays at all?
Hanukkah. So really most I learned about Judaism was from school and Jewish school friends.
But your father was very intellectual and...
He was an intellectual, very much, yes.
What was your town like? What was your town like?
Well, we lived on the outskirts of Berlin. My parents moved there when I was a baby, and I'm back there now, in fact, in that house. So there were a few Jewish families, and then they became fewer as the exodus started. In fact, my family were the last to remain. And when Jewish children were being thrown out of schools, and we started in the local primary school, and my parents firmly believed that we should go to the ordinary school. Then when my brother moved on to secondary school, it was a normal state school, until there were only 2 Jewish boys left. And the headmaster wanted his school to be the first pure Aryan school, and tried to persuade the parents to remove their boys, which neither parent did, until it became a danger, that they were afraid something might happen to the boys. So then my brother went to a Jewish school.
Do you remember when that was?
Yes, that was in, I think in 35. Must have been in 35, because I started secondary school in 36 and had to go to a Jewish secondary school.
Which school did you go to?
Private Waldschule Grunewald, known as Lessler Schule, which was quite a well-known school, not very far from us. And my little sister, she was 6 years younger than me, had just started the ordinary primary school. And then the Kristallnacht, the next morning after Kristallnacht, the school wisely telephoned my parents and said it would be we are sending your daughter home for her own safety. Please meet her. And that was the end of her going to a normal school. And for her, at age 6, she just couldn't comprehend that the children who were very friendly with her, walking to and from school, suddenly, by their own parents, were told, don't talk to that girl. You know, and then this situation worsened after I left, that even the neighbors would say, Jews are not to walk on the pavement, you walk on the road. And this was a small suburb where there are not so many people living. It's not like a big apartment building where you have hundreds of tenants. So you're very conscious of everybody. And some people were extremely unpleasant, while others were very quietly pleasant and helpful. You know, there were people who said, make sure you can get out of your garden and you can always come to our house if there's danger. And when the bombing was bad, you know, if their house was standing, I mean, our house was very badly bombed. They had my mother staying there and so on. But the people who helped were quiet people. They didn't make a noise about it.
Is there any contact with them today, with the next generations?
Pardon?
Is there any contact with their relatives or next generations of these people?
Well, most people have gone.
Yeah.
I hardly know anybody now.
When did you go back to this house?
I went back in, I think it was 1949, during the Berlin airlift. I went for the first time. I went to work in the holidays in an international peace camp, rubber clearing, because I was desperate to go back, and it was very difficult to get to Germany. You know, it just, unless you belong to some forces or something, it wasn't very easy.
But you're living in this house now.
Yes, you see, my parents, by miracle, survived and stayed in that house. It was very badly bombed. My father, the last year and a half of the war, my father was imprisoned. Well, he was in a police prison at first, which I think was turned into a Sammellager, a collecting camp for the concentration camps. Then he was shifted after a while to the Jewish hospital, which was the collecting camp.
Where was that?
In Berlin. And it was under terrible... he started off in the police prison in Alexanderplatz. And what he told me, there were 40 men in a small room sharing wooden bunks with one toilet at the end of the room. They had typhoid fever. They had all sorts of things. They lived on sort of water soup. My mother was able to visit him, or at least come there. I think she used to take his dirty clothes to wash, and then she'd put some boiled potatoes in his socks and for something to eat. But there were many intellectuals, and between them they organized lectures, and they kept their minds active. You know, they didn't just sit and grumble.
And he was there
And
for
other
a year.
people sorry?
He was there for a year and a half.
Yes, he was there until the city was taken and the prison doors were opened. So he more or less ran home before the bridges were blown up. He told us once they had a gypsy boy, because you know the gypsies were persecuted just as much. And he couldn't understand why they were all there. Because he thought they must have committed a crime. See?
Just a little bit more about how you lived in Berlin before the war. Were your parents' friends Jewish or non-Jewish? Were you aware of any
Well, now my mother being non-Jewish, of course there was that side of the family. And we were very close with our grandmother. She came to live with us. And one of my mother's sisters who lived nearby. And I mean, we remained close. Well, there were the Jewish relatives. Most of them lived right in the town. And you see, my family had moved out to the outskirts. And as things got worse, actually people moved about less. They were too much tied up with their own problems.
Right.
And our refuge was the school, really. That was our whole life, where we could talk about our problems and get away from our parents' problems.
You were
which
free
we did.
there.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Are you aware that any non-Jewish friends became Nazis after the Nazis?
Well, in my sister's case, who was still in a public primary school at the time of the Kristallnacht, I had already gone to the Jewish secondary school earlier that year.
Mm-hmm.
No, I'd been there for 2 years, in fact, sorry.
Mm-hmm. When you were at this school, what were your aspirations? What goals did you have? What did you want to be when you grew up? Do you remember?
I don't know that at that point I had any aspirations. I was very keen on art. I think it was later I was interested in biology, but at that point I don't remember having real aspirations.
How did you learn? You've already mentioned your sister, but were there other things that happened that gave you an inkling as to what was happening when the Nazis came to power?
Well, we knew, of course, that my father had lost his whatever you call it, license as a lawyer, and that he had to switch his activities. He then became a legal advisor. He was allowed to advise people, but not to appear in court. And he had to close down his office. He had an office not far away that had to be closed. And we realized that things were not right, but I didn't fully understand it. What I can remember is very early on, when the Nazis used to march through the streets singing their songs and holding the flag and all that, and when they were coming through our street, I ran out, as any child would if there's something going on, climbing on the gate to watch them. And my father, it's the only time I can remember my father actually slapping me. And I didn't quite understand. You know, what are you doing out there? Keep away from those people, sort of thing. And then started these problems about the schools, that you couldn't just go to any school, and that people wouldn't speak to you anymore, and so on. We didn't ask questions, really. I just didn't comprehend it all, but I don't think I asked questions.
Do you remember more about your school, the kind of subjects you were learning, or any kind of preparations for immigration possibly, or?
Yes, now my parents made arrangements that we took some private English classes at another family's house. This was a very common activity. Even there, I remember my mother got some gramophone record, as they were called then, a course of English. You know, this tremendous interest in learning English. My father had a very classical Greek and Latin education, and his knowledge of English and French was there, but was weak. So, and holidays we had, my parents liked to get out of Germany for as long as it was possible, so we used to travel out to Italy or other places just to get out of the place. But that soon became not possible. And I remember once that was probably the last time we went to Italy, and on the frontier, when after all the checking had been done, the passport controls, and the train was going to start moving, they suddenly called us out. And somebody had knowledge that we were going on holiday and wanted to play a trick on us. And we were called out to be searched. And that was the first real trauma. Mm-hmm. The train went meanwhile. And here we were, between Austria and Germany, on the frontier. Mm-hmm. And they searched us as though we were smuggling, which we certainly weren't smuggling anything. We wouldn't have dared and wouldn't have done it anyway. Mm-hmm. And they searched my little sister, who was in nappies. She was a baby, more or less. And they even searched her bodily, which was a terrifying thing, absolutely terrifying for everybody.
Do you remember how old you were at that time, or what year it was?
That was well, I think it was 33, or it could have been 34. Yes.
Was that the last family vacation that you started to take, or?
I think we had one more, but then it started that you were afraid. If the bell rang late in the evening, you were afraid. Mm. And I'm still afraid. If I hear a bell ringing suddenly, I shudder. Mm-hmm. It's something that stayed with me. Because that's what used to happen. The bell would ring and somebody would come and take the men. Mm-hmm. So that's what you had to live with.
When did your father get in prison?
Well, I'd gone by then. Mm-hmm. I left in 39 with the children's transport, and it was the last year and a half of the war. Mm-hmm. Because then gradually I more or less lost contact. I had Red Cross messages, 25 words, which were wonderful. And I did get an occasional letter. My father's sister was in Sweden, and occasionally I had a letter when she'd had a letter from them. But when the war was over, that I had no news whatsoever, when everything broke down. So I had no idea if they were living or not. And contact was established illegally through a Jewish soldier. My father just boldly approached some people, although they weren't supposed to, and happened to find a young ex-Austrian or German Jew in the army, and then that established a sort of international mail system, with my parents' house being the GPO, the General Post Office.
This was a German soldier? No. It was you mean an American?
It was a refugee who
soldier.
joined the forces, you see,
right.
Who of course was sympathetic.
Of course. Yeah. So you were going to school and things were beginning to get bad, and at a certain point,
yes,
you probably couldn't go to school any longer.
Well, you see, my parents, like so many others I've found out now, didn't believe that it would get worse. They felt very assimilated. And my father was very sort of conservative, really. He didn't want to leave Germany. He didn't want to leave his place. And it wasn't until Kristallnacht that they realized something has to be done, and it was too late then. So they put their names on the waiting list for the USA, for Australia, for South Africa, where there was some chance, some hope of being lucky. But the war broke out before their number came up. And then the children's transport started, the movement started at the end of 1938. It was very, very soon after the Kristallnacht. So my parents asked me, because they felt if the whole family can get out soon, to have one person out would be a help. It's one less to get out.
Mm-hmm.
And I went confidently with that hope that, oh, well, in a couple of months we'll all meet and go on. And it's an adventure for me, and I was quite an adventurous schoolgirl. And they asked me, I mean, they didn't force me, they said, would you like to go? And I thought it was a brilliant idea. And so they put my name down. Then I think there was a fire in London at Bloomsbury House where they were processing everything, and the papers were lost. So everything went to sleep again until early May 1939, when they picked it up, and I was told, well, you're going next week. No, it was very sudden.
Mm-hmm.
How did your parents find out about the kinder transplant? Do you know how they found out about it?
The children's transplant?
Yeah.
I really don't know. There must have been, I don't know,
Mm-hmm.
maybe something in the Jewish papers, because there was a Jewish paper.
And
Mm-hmm.
so
I
you
don't
don't have any idea how it was arranged for you, or how they put it together, or the process that was involved?
Well, I know there were applications forms filled, and a family in England, I was very lucky, I went to a family, well, they must have been trying. They wanted to have a girl because they had a little girl themselves and wanted somebody who would sort of help with her. So they applied for a girl, and I knew I was going to this family that was half Jewish like ourselves. I think that's all I knew, really.
Did you have contact with them before you came
There
here?
must have been some contact, yes, because I knew where I was going.
Mm-hmm.
Did you know other children who were leaving? Did you know other children who were leaving?
Well, at that point, people were leaving all the time. Now, some children at school were told by their parents that they were going. Others were not, because some of them went illegally. They arranged it, and they didn't tell their children not to let it out, you see. But people just suddenly disappeared, and at the Kristallnacht, one of the masters disappeared from the school to concentration camp. And I think there may have been some older boys, over 16. And this master came back with his ears frozen. But he came back. Many of them were let out again. And from that we realized that there was something terrible waiting. And then we were very much aware. Then came the time you were not allowed to listen to foreign radio, but everybody did. And every day we discussed the latest news. But concentration camp, what happened, most of what I know now, I only know since recently, actually.
You didn't know at that time?
No.
So you were about to embark on this journey, and you knew a little bit about that there was a family that was waiting for
Yes.
you, and you were adventurous. Was this the first time you'd been away from home, or had you been away?
Yes, I had been on one Jewish holiday camp to Denmark. So I had been away from home, but I didn't really, I hated eating at other people's places. I was a very fussy child for eating, and eating somewhere else to me was the biggest torture imaginable.
What was the date of your departure? When did you leave? Do you know the date of your departure?
Oh yes, on the Sunday, the 21st of May, 1939.
And you were how old?
I was going to be 13 the next week, and strangely we moved into that house, on the 21st of May. So I always remember it.
And where did you get the train? Where did you catch the train?
I can't remember which station it was, what it was called. It was probably Anhalter Bahnhof, I seem to, but I'm not. All I remember is where I arrived, and that was Liverpool Street, and I'll never forget that.
But the one in Berlin, Anhalter, was that a really big station?
Yes. But I'm just, I don't remember now.
Do you remember who went with you?
My parents went with me, and my brother and sister were on the platform at our local station. The train went through there.
What station was that?
Heerstraße. It's not a long-distance station. The train just went through. It's the local Stadtbahn. And that's the last time I saw them.
Your brother and sister?
Yes. And Liverpool streets, then we went through Holland, where people were very nice, crossed, which was an adventure, to England. And my experience of Liverpool Street Station was that a family friend of ours, who had been encouraging my parents to send me, was going to meet me, and he was late. So all children were collected, and there I was. And in German we say bestellt und nicht abgeholt. She's been ordered, but a parcel that's been ordered but not collected.
What did you do?
Well, I just stood there, not crying, I think, and stood, and the whole place cleared. All these children were collected, and then the friend came.
Do you remember what you were carrying? What you
Yes,
were wearing?
What I was wearing, no, I had 2 big cases, that I know. And I took my favorite 10 books.
What were they?
Well, it was Kipling. The Jungle Book was one of my, and Tom Sawyer, and a few others that are still with me somewhere.
Did your parents pack anything special for you that you found out about later?
No, I think I helped packing. I had a lot of new clothes to last me for a while.
Did you have any valuables with you, or?
I had a little diary with a torch battery in it. You pull out the pen and it lights up, and I used to write that at night in bed, and I don't think anybody knew about it. And that was my sort of faithful friend for any emotional problems.
Do you still have the diary?
Well, that diary is somewhere. It wasn't destroyed. It's in some attic, yes.
What was your most prized possession? Was that it, the diary?
I think a thing I prized very much, and is still with me now, although I've lost it twice, was little folding scissors that my parents sent me with somebody who was coming to England. And that was the last thing I had from my parents. It was wrapped with some sweets. The sweets, of course, were eaten. But that scissors goes with me everywhere. And when I lost it a couple of times, I was very upset. It's in my handbag now.
Oh, you still have it. You have them with it?
Yeah, is there something, can you pull it out?
Yes.
Yeah, let's see.
Yeah.
I'll put it on
Handbag for my parents. You see.
Let's turn the camera.
Oh, okay, the camera there. Okay, let's see. Okay. You want to hold them up maybe a little higher? Your scissors?
So we can see.
I left it in the sand at the sea once.
But otherwise you've had them all these years and...
Yeah, 60 years.
Wow.
39.99.
And that you've traveled around a bit, it sounds like, or you've lived in different
yes,
places.
it's been around the world.
And these were the last things you had from your parents until you saw them again?
Well, yes. The little sentimental things.
Sure. And then I'm putting it on.
Sent to a school that had been discussed there, and there was a lot of help. I had a lot of local help in a way. The family, well, I'm grateful to them because they saved my life, but we had a lot of emotional problems, actually. I had to work very hard, and I was determined to do my school exams. My ambition was to study, And I was fortunate that I was able to study.
You had a good school.
I had a good school.
Yeah.
But I was doing the housework and everything, and then doing my homework late at night, and then they'd grumble that I was wasting electricity, you know, that kind of thing. You know, gradually I had to do more and more housework. But I was very fortunate when I hear now of so many who had no education, through no fault of their own, and could never catch up. And I mean, I was lucky to survive while my brother and sister weren't. I just consider myself very lucky. And I tried to make the most of the opportunities that were given me. You know, I always took an extra subject because I feel knowledge is something that can't be taken away from you.
What was the main thing that you studied?
Agriculture and zoology. And well, somehow I managed to take both to degree level, which was good because it helped me with jobs. You know, I've been a biology teacher, I've been an agricultural lecturer, and that's what I did in the last years.
How long? You said you had returned to Berlin. How long have you been living?
Pardon?
How long have you been living in Berlin now?
86, when we retired, we were working in Africa, where they retire people at 60, and that year my father died. And so I had a lot to sort of organize, because he was working, he didn't retire. When the war was over, he was immediately accepted as a lawyer again, and he became a notary public, and he had a big practice doing restitution for Jews. And well, I had a lot to wind up for him. And I inherited the house, as I was the only one left. So my husband and I decided to make the house our project. It needed renovating, patching up, and so on, and we enlarged it and turned it into flats, which gave us something to live on now. Because having worked abroad, we weren't in pensionable jobs there, so that our pension is very small, and this has considerably helped us.
So you weren't only in England, and you lived in numerous places.
Well, yeah, we had lived in England and went to Africa. Actually, my husband got a job there. We hadn't planned to go to Africa, but it was through work, and then we were there for 20 years.
Where in Africa?
In Ghana, in Zambia, and in Nigeria. And we retired from there, and I went straight to Berlin then to you know, sort out all this inheritance things. But we've had enough of the city, we've had enough of Berlin, and
Really? What are your plans now then?
And to go to the Channel Islands.
Oh.
In a rural situation. And we still like, I keep the property, but I'd like to get out, well, we both like to get out of the city and all the problems.
Particularly in
well, there is
Germany,
definitely a sort of foreigner tension with high unemployment. My husband is a foreigner, and he doesn't feel secure there. And, you know, there are a lot of problems that we'd like to get away from.
Yeah, sure. I'm going to ask you just one last thing, because again, time is running here. Is there any last kind of thing you'd like to say about the conference that we're at now, what it's meant for you?
Well, for me, it has meant a lot to me, because having lived in a little country town where there was just this one Jewish family, or partly Jewish family, I've never really been in the crowd of refugees or the crowd of Jewish people. So I've never been much with people of my own background. I don't mean this socially, but my own background as a refugee, as somebody from Germany, and certainly not in Africa. And this has brought together 1,000 of us that have something very important in common. And how important that something is, the conference has shown, really. I found it extremely moving and heartwarming. It's something I have missed. I mean, I'm glad I went to the first conference, which I found very moving. Although I met nobody I knew, not one person, but it didn't matter in a way. It didn't matter. No, the conference could be bigger, could be, longer, because we all have so much to listen to and to contribute still that we haven't really had a chance to yet.
That's true.
And I think it's been good to have your generation mixing in with it, because that will make for the continuity of our pledge that such a thing should never happen again. I mean, not the conference, but the the Holocaust. Yes.
Wow. Well, thank you. And just for the tape, do you want to say your name once again, and also your birth date? I don't think we got before.
Just to say your name again.
Oh yes. Well, I'd say it in German.
Yeah.
Ruth Israel. I'm now Ruth Biswas, but I changed my name simply by marriage.
And when were you born? What date?
1926. And I married an Indian, a Hindu, who himself is a refugee from what is now Bangladesh. So we have a very different but similar background. We both come from families where education was the main value above all material values, and we're both kind of religious refugees.
Worried about your dinner.
Fine.
Great. If we can meet again, if not, I feel at least that we try to.
Well, yes.
Some
I'd like to get into the concert in good time.
Yeah.
Partly also because I don't hear all that well.
That's right.
Always,
Okay.
and I want to meet my